Question number 4, James Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister and reads, does he have confidence in all his ministers?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes.
Parliamentary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he have confidence that all of his ministers, in particular Murray McCully, disclosed all details about the threat of legal action against the government by Mr Al-Khalaf and his associates?
Order.
Mr.
Right
Speaker,
Honourable Prime
yes,
Minister.
I refer the member to the Cabinet paper on this matter.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Did any of his ministers suggest to Mr Al-Khalaf and his associates that they sue the Government of New Zealand?
Speaker,
the Right Honourable
well, I can't
Prime
speak
Minister.
for the other ministers. I've never asked that question, but no, I certainly didn't. I'd be surprised if they did.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Why then did Brown Rig Agriculture, in a letter dated November 2011 to Murray McCully, say that Mr Al-Khalaf will be looking, quote, to seek commercial redress as indeed suggested by your government as a last resort option for him, end quote?
The Right Honourable
Mr.
Prime
Speaker,
Minister.
I can't answer that question because I wasn't privy to those conversations. But what we do know by the paper trail that was released last week is that this problem was the making of Labor that misled that investor and misled Saudi ministers. And it's very inconvenient for them, but it's actually factually correct.
Order.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Yes, my question didn't relate to the last Labor government.
No. The question was there any, referred to a letter quoting Mr Al-Khalaf, and did that seek legal, or was he advised to seek legal? And the Prime Minister right at the start said he's not aware, not privy to that conversation. The question was definitely addressed.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
So did the government encourage Mr Al-Khalaf to seek commercial redress so that his government could justify buying Mr Al-Khalaf's cooperation for the Gulf States free trade deal?
Right, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I'm not aware of all the conversations that other ministers would have had, but the reality of the situation was that Labor inherited a mess by deliberately misleading the Saudis over this issue.
Supplementary.
A point of order, the Right Honourable Winston.
Speaker, the last two questions were answered by the Prime Minister in his first opening words, and then it became straight away, both occasions, an attack on the Labor Party. Now, frankly, that cannot be in order.
I'll hear from the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Well, Mr Speaker, you will be able to note that the member asking the question referred to the government. Mr Key was simply making it clear that it was a previous government, and Mr Peters, as a member of that previous government, would know it was led by Labor.
Order. I thank both members for their assistance on this occasion. Because the issue is one that's taken quite a lot of time in this House, and certainly it is an issue that has spanned over two administrations, I don't think on that occasion I'd agree with the Right Honourable Winston Peters that the reference back to a previous administration was a direct attack on that administration. Are there further supplementaries?
There are supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Why did the Prime Minister say to the media last week that he was not aware of any...
Order. I invite the member to start his question again.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Why did the Prime Minister say to the media last week that he was not aware of any cause of action when Murray McCully claimed in the House that the reason for the farm in the desert was because New Zealand was exposed to, quote, legal claims estimated to be up to $30 million, end quote?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, because the way I interpreted the question was, had I actually seen the action of the 20 to 30 million, I said I was aware of it. My point was I was aware of it in the Cabinet paper, but I was also aware that that was a potential threat and it was parked up when negotiations began.
Supplementary.
A supplementary question, James Shaw.
Given that he has said, quote, I expect high standards from my ministers, and if they don't meet the standards I set, then obviously I will take action, end quote, what actions can we expect from the Prime Minister to get the full story from Murray McCully?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think Mr McCully has provided the full story. It's fairly simple. The previous Labor government misled the Saudis. Mr. Speaker, this government wanted to do a few things. One, there was always the chance of some legal action. B, it wanted to complete a free trade agreement. And thirdly, it wanted to promote New Zealand's expertise in that Middle East environment. In my opinion, that while the Minister found a creative way through, he did everything above board.
Order. Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
Does he believe that in 2013 the Al Khalaf Group had a legal right of action against the New Zealand government for $20 to $30 million?
Speaker,
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, it's not for me to offer legal opinions in this House, and the member knows that.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable David Parker.
I again seek leave to table the unredacted version of the Cabinet papers that the Prime Minister says blacks his claims but do not.
Order. The last part's unnecessary. Leave is sought to table now the unredacted Cabinet papers dated back to 2007-8. Leave is sought to table those documents. Is there any objection? There is objection. Order.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
Would a minister who authorised a multi-million-dollar facilitation payment to be made to a disaffected businessman to unlock a free trade agreement retain his confidence?
The Right Honourable Prime
Speaker,
Minister.
absolutely, and for the reasons I pointed out earlier. The previous Labor government can run, but they can't hide. On 2 occasions, they deliberately misled the Saudis. They know it. Phil Goff actually went to Riyadh.
Order. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Order. Order. Both sides of the House will now settle down. Question number 5. Point of order. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Is it within standing orders for the Prime Minister to accuse the Honourable Phil Goff of having lied? That's what he said when he got to his feet.
I do apologise. I certainly didn't hear that. There was a heated exchange. There was a lot of noise coming. I didn't hear that was said. If the way forward, because the Honourable Phil Goff is not here in the chamber, on the basis that the Prime Minister did make that statement, I ask him to stand and withdraw that part of that statement. Order. If the Prime Minister said that the Honourable Phil Goff lied, that is unparliamentary. I'm asking him now to withdraw. Order. I don't need the assistance from the Honourable Member on this occasion. I'm asking the Prime Minister to withdraw that comment.
I withdraw point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order. Right,
Speaker,
Honourable.
documents make it quite clear that
Order. The Prime Minister is now trifling with the chair, and that's the risk that he may well be having to leave the chamber early. Order. This is a point of order, Mr. Brownlee. This is a point of order. I don't expect to have to point out to the Leader of the House that this point of order will be heard. I'll accept that explanation on this occasion. The Honourable David Parker.
What remedy do the opposition have, sir, in this situation? We can't table the documents because the government refuses. Let us table them.
Order. Prime Minister.
The government refuses.
Now, order. I just want to make this absolutely clear. I'm going to listen to a point of order from the Honourable David Parker. And if any member interjects or speaks out loudly, that member, regardless of who or she is, will be leaving the chamber immediately. The Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What recourse does the opposition have when the Prime Minister refers to, and the Associate Minister of Foreign Affairs refers to redacted parts of the document as justifying their assertions, and yet we can't present the documents to the House because the government continually refuses to allow them to be tabled?
A reasonable point, and listen, this is a matter of contest. At the end of the day, the member has the ability to seek leave to table. If that's refused by any member of the House, then those documents do not get tabled in this House. The way forward, and I suspect we'll see more questions on this raised in the future, The way further is further questions and supplementaries in this House. The Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I think it's only reasonable in the circumstances to point out the comments referred to by the Prime Minister are in the redacted version that is publicly available.
Order. Order. That's not a point of order. It's a point. Order. My patience will expire fairly quickly with one member in this House, I can assure him. Question number 5, the Honourable Annette King.
Mr Speaker, my question's to the Prime Minister.